Oh yeah, baby, 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 boo. I always say that. I always say bundle baby. I need to start doing the Clee Bear thing. I don't want to pressure her or anything, You know, like I said, I don't want her to, feel like she's got a little stalker boy or whatever. Rub my dick in her face, rub my dick in her face, $50,000. $50,000. Like I said, you do have some control over that. Well, you have all the control. you know. You could play me. I could show up, cash in hand. I couldn't withdraw that much cash at once, though. I'd have to ask how that would work. The IRS would be like, "Whoa, the fuck you doing, boy?" There's I don't know what they are, but there's rules, that sends up red flags if you withdraw too much at a time, if you deposit too much at a time, and all that. Just stuff. Assume that you're being watched from every angle, assume that you're being watched from outer space, assume that, Big Brother tech, I'm just saying, like if you're a bad guy wanting to do bad shit. There was an example, this guy gave an example like it, and I've given this example before too, like if you've done, I don't even really want to talk about it, but like if justice is not being served and you have a friend or family member who you fear that they're going to be like ended, and you've decided that the only way to save their life, because they're like crazy, they're following them, and it's not just like like if you've got a little sis, who's in a toxic relationship, it's like, look, this guy's gonna end you one of these days, but he's a good guy, he's going through some shit. Okay, I tried. You just gotta accept you've got a loved one who has fallen in love with a viper, which is a snake. And boy, when he's sweet, but when he's not, and just fucking shit. And you have that relationship, but like I said, like with my brother-in-law and whatnot, that a guy's ego is probably one of the most powerful things in the world. It really is. I mean, human beings, they get emotional and, they do things, that they can't undo. But guys, I mean, it's like, oh, it's powerful, because it's like my brother-in-law. I mean, it's every encounter, it's shocking, it's like I see this shit, dude. He just absolutely, because like I said, I shut him down, and it's like he just will not let it go, and it's like a case study. I'm not even like bitching, like this motherfucker, because I have a cousin who, he was an only child, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole either because I've done it before, so I won't. But whoa, so if you've got, what I mean, it's like you're not gonna like have the conversation with it, like let's just say his name is Jim, our fictional boyfriend or even husband of your little sis or whatever. Say, hey man, you seem like a good guy, don't be it as threatening or ultimatum or you're gonna do this, because you have injured his soul, his spirit, his psyche, his being, everything that he is. So you have to ask, but you have to ask firmly, and it's hard for me to put into words, but man, you're a good dude, you got a lot of good qualities or whatever, you got this, concrete business going on, you're obviously a smart guy, but man, why you gotta be abusive, you know what I mean? Or whatever, however you want to go about it, and really that's the best you can do, and some people might say, well, that would be a puss move, and that would be just stroking his ego, and it's like you can't do anything right. You know what I mean? If you would have came and said, look, man, you know, you're going to stop, you know, beating up my sister, you know, or you and I are going to have issues. That ain't going to work. That's just going to lead to you and him having issues, and you will have issues. You might win, you might lose. Generally, the good guy wins because the good guy is coming from a place of virtue, and he understands, like, reality better, like he just does. Not necessarily. You know, there's bullies out there and stuff, you know, brawlers and shit, you know, who can cause physical harm and whatnot, be it with their hands or with force amplifiers, as I made that term up. Like a stick in your hand would be a force amplifier. So, but I first heard that term used from Teddy Petit, but he wasn't talking about weapons. He was talking about, you know, a trained individual who was basically a weapon, you know, who a highly trained individual being inserted with a group of trained individuals, and he offers his expertise and advice, if I was understanding that right. That was years ago, but, you know, because he was he was like 8 different things. He started out as like a grunt, and then in the army, and then he was like a Green Beret and a Ranger, and what the hell else was he? He was like triple tabbed, but I guess tabbed doesn't necessarily mean you were that. It just means that you like went through that program. I'm not a military buff, but every now and then I, you know, watch these. Anyway, and he's the real deal. You know, I'm not saying, oh, and then he was a Navy SEAL for a bit, you know, but he worked with the Navy SEALs, I guess, you know, as they tend to do. Those guys, you know, they all kind of follow the same template, I guess, you know, joint task force, whatever it's called. So they do that on purpose, you know. So everybody's, you got your aerial support, and then the ground guys go in, and blah, 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 you know. So the Navy SEALs can communicate with the Rangers just fine. I don't know, whatever. So anyway, force amplifier, you know. But generally speaking, it's just like one of those empirical things, you know. It's like, you know, the person, you know, cooler heads prevail sort of a thing, you know. So it's like that sort of extends out to everything. You know, if you're an unreasonable asshole and you don't understand that you're an unreasonable asshole, that's going to like branch out, and you're going to not understand other things, such as actions have consequences, you know. And if you know, badmouth somebody, they might just call you on it. Like, even if you want to tough talk, you know, like every now and then, I'm not a tough talker or anything like that, but just there's been times in the past, you know, I'm not the type of person that gets all hyped up, you know, but I'm the kind of person who, you know, if you're being rude, I'm not going to let you get away with that, you know. Like if I make eye contact with you and say, hey, how you doing? And you make eye contact with me and you don't say anything, I'll say something like, me too. Or, that good, huh? You know, so technically they could turn around and be like, what? You know, it's like when they're the ones being rude. And I recently posted a video. I think I posted it in the Amen Drop the Mic. It's the 2. It's this former homeless guy. And it's a short video, and he was basically stating, you know, why you should be nice to people. You know, but that's, I think he's talking more about the person, you know, like the road rager, you know, who's, maybe you accidentally cut him off. I don't know how you accidentally cut someone off, but maybe you're distracted and your turn came up and you're talking on your phone, which you shouldn't be, and you, oh shit, and then, you know. So, and I've had, like, that's another example. If I'm in the right lane, you know, be it on the highway or even like in public roads, I'll try and stay in the right lane until I need to get in the left lane to turn. And I'm doing the speed limit. Someone's right on my ass, you know, I'll put my pinky up in the air, you know, and I'll put like my 2 fingers together and then my pinky. And usually they back off. And if they pass me, I'll just give them a little wave. I won't just look at them, because then it will look like I'm fucking mad dogging them, which may or may not be a crumb for them. You know, like, calm down and say, we calm. So you need to be sure and, present yourself in such a way where you're in control. You know, like my brother-in-law, like I remember that was like, I remember I said something, he was doing something ridiculous, and it's like you almost feel sorry for him, it's like it's like my future bestie Cool Breeze said, and I agree with wholeheartedly. Most people, be it male or female, their mental maturity is 12. Like it ends there. They still have the ability to, make ends meet and hold down a job just because they have responsibilities and obligations thrown at them that they're either going to succeed or fail at. So they feel like, they're an adult. But on an emotional level, when shit hits the fan or something pops off in a parking lot, they're 12, plus or minus. And some people are even younger, they're 6 or 7. These brats who throw fits, because they got fired, from somewhere, and there's a certain group of people who are really bad about that. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to say, for my hate horse. But there's two, like, groups of people, who have a stereotype of drama that is just fucking notorious, and they usually have calling cards. They usually dress a certain way, talk a certain way. So they usually do actually wear signs around their neck, but not necessarily. Those people are absolutely, 6 or 7 years old on a maturity level. And then there's some people, who are, 15 or 16, And those are the people who end up being like managers, and they own chains of, businesses, and, they're kicking some pretty serious ass, But still, on a maturity level, when the shit hits the fan, they're 16 or so at best. And then there's rare people who are actually their age. And see, the humans, and I've said all this shit before, so I'm not going to go down this damn rabbit trail, but unfortunately, those people, because human beings only have so much capacity, if you're really keyed up in one area, you're going to be lacking in other areas. So those people, they're the ones who, their wife and kids are like estranged or whatever the word is. The wife's unhappy, and he thinks he's being a good husband and father because he takes them on vacations, to Europe, every year, and they have a vacation home at Lake Wonderful, somewheres, and, but that's not what being a good husband and being a good father and being a good man and being a good boss and being a good leader and being a good, inspiration is. Success is a marker, a big one, because it takes a lot, of time and intelligence and, to be successful, like really high-end successful. But, you just don't understand, Dad, and why would you do something like that? I didn't raise you like that. It's because you didn't raise him at all. You came home and said, how are things going? Good to hear. How are things going with you, Sally? Good to hear. And then you move on. You don't engage. You need to have your finger on the pulse of what they're actually doing, You're playing catch with little Billy, It's like, you seem kind of distant, Billy. You seem kind of out of it. Everything going cool? Everything's good at school? Now, don't be, a hard ass about things. But just, you can tell me, I might be able to offer some advice, some shit, You got to work these things out, Somebody picking on you? Did a girl, do something, let you down, embarrass you, whatever. But obviously it depends on how old they are. You might not want to say that to your son if you're 16. Did you get rejected, or something? But if he's 7, and say, yeah, whatever. People don't date at 7. Fucking they were. They don't really date, but I don't know what they do these days. But I remember in grade school, There were people who were quote unquote a couple. You know. Middle school, now you've got people dating and kissing and shit. Even got a few people who are fucking. Then high school, that gets amped up a bit, and just so on and so forth. But so after that, there it is. But anyway, I remember I said something like with my cousin, or not my cousin, but my brother-in-law. I was like, "There's something wrong with you," and there truly is. It's like, so anyway, that that may or may not work. But anyway, I digress. If you have to talk to someone, like, hey man, I'm asking you, because it will, especially if he was an only child, but even if not, because everybody's got their mental miswire. And there are people out there who are just, I think I got it in the Amen Drop the Mic too. This guy who like was honking and waving at this female cop. And he was, this guy was just like, his nostrils were flaring. He was red, his eyes were big. There was, steam coming out of his ears, just, there is no reasoning with that guy. That guy is a, crazy fucking animal. And that's the kind of, rage and adrenaline that, causes people to do things that are permanent, such as, well, the one guy, that security officer dude. And as I said, I did that video, and I think that psychiatrist dude nailed it. He was just tired of losing. He desperately wanted the authority. He was in the military, Air Force. Like I said, a guy like that, 7-year career, above and beyond, didn't just put in his 4 years, but he put in 7, checking air pressure and landing gear and cleaning window screens. And there's no way that this guy was exposed to any stress in his life. Not handling it like that, because that was like stress of, flailing. There's, zealots, who go above and beyond with too much force and whatnot. But this guy was a little boy. This guy was a Call of Duty hero, real life zero. So whatever he did in the Air Force, it was probably just show up, put in your fucking hours, and go back to the base or whatever. This guy did not acquire any leadership skills, communication skills, problem-solving skills, none of that. And he just got tired of losing, the micro dick measuring contest. Like I said, the other guy wasn't exactly intelligent either. So I knew it was going to end badly, obviously, because it's a video, so it's like from the get-go. You already know the ending. You don't know exactly what it is, but you know how it ends. You don't know, how it's going to happen. But even just seeing that interaction, and yeah, tactical, with the authority and the parking lot patrol. They should be in a golf cart with a shirt that says security. And their tactical gear should be gloves, but not gloves with sand in the knuckles or anything like that. Just like, work gloves or whatever, for lack of better, not like big leather work gloves. Mace, and really that's it. For the job they're doing, that's the only tactical gear that they would need, and a walkie-talkie, so they can talk to each other, and, police on speed dial. Not 911, but, some sort of that they've worked out with their security company they work for. And like that guy said, the psychiatrist, he was shouting out the card, accuracy, integrity, and truth. And truth was highlighted, and it's like, truth? Okay, truth? So you specialize in what? Telling stories? Regurgitating, scenarios that happened? Why is truth, a company value system for a security system? That's like if you owned a plumbing company, integrity, honesty, and truth. Well, gee, I appreciate that, Plumber Bob. Well, I guess maybe, hey, I ain't going to sell you shit you don't need. I guess that could apply, but, you know what I'm saying. So, anyway. And my cousin, one time I think I said this, he was turning the wheel all the way on my dad's truck. He was driving, and it's hard on the power steering pump, and it makes like a squealing sound. And I said, oh, by the way, when you turn the wheel all the way like that, it's hard on the steering pump, That's why it's making that sound. I didn't say you shouldn't, anything like that. I kept it neutral, these little tactics, communication. You're not, being accusatory or whatever. You're just bringing something up. And immediately, the next thing he did was, and instead of saying, did you not hear me? I just said, or not. And then he didn't do it after that. But because I told him, he just had to. Okay, I'm not going to listen, but not because you're telling me to. Okay, fine, I didn't know that, but come on, man, punch yourself in the face. And my cousin isn't a bitch, Well, neither is my brother-in-law, really, but he's more of a, he's a punk. But, and like I said, he married into a good situation, if he would have married some sort of low caliber, somebody from his neck of the woods, because he grew up in kind of a punk part of town. There's different areas that just for some reason, lower caliber, less, cognitive horsepower, more floating through life instead of, but you know what I'm trying to say. I mean, he's not that bad, but there's just people who are generally like that. They're more reactive. They're more of a, hindsight's 20/20. So, I've got a year's worth of experience. Therefore, I've figured out 5 years worth of information. In whatever, dating, the job market, whatever. There's people out there like that. And time and experience is a valuable thing, obviously, but hence the term know what you don't know. So people from that neck of the woods would be like, that's so stupid. You're such a stupid person. How can you know what you don't know? There's people out there like that versus people who realize, that's not literally saying know what you don't know, magically. It's basically just a way of saying, look, there's factors involved here that I'm unaware of. I can do as much homework. I can ask people. I can research shit. But there's still always going to be scenarios that may or may not pop up, especially depending on how many moving parts there is and whatever it is you're doing. Like if you want to go into business for yourself or whatever, it's like what could go wrong? Just sit down and think. Lawsuits, regulations, rules, fucking, you know what I mean? You sit and write shit down and you do the best that you can. But you always leave yourself room for, the unexpected versus, some schmuck, from low caliberville, like, oh yeah, shit, looks like we got it all here. I got the game plan, I'm a mover and a shaker and a mover. Entrepreneur, 100,000 air, looks at himself in the mirror and says, you got this. Versus a guy who's like, okay, I think we got a lot of bases covered. I've done everything I can. I'm ready to do this, Have I got a deal for you? Versus, I have a solution for that. Here's one solution that I think might work for you. Give me feedback. Let's do this together. Versus, I'll hook you up, bro. So, anyway, So I'm up here at time. I was going to mention something, but I don't want to. I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm going to go ahead and post this because, as per usual, you know, I end up kind of saying some pretty epic shit. Most of it's shit that I've said before, but, you know, I have fans out there, you know, who just like to hear me speak. He's so logical. I love it when he talks about being a husband and a father. It's too bad Katie Boo's dead. I wish she wasn't. Like I said, I just picture her, you know, like I said, ODing on pills or some shit. Just drifting off to sleep with her cute little face and her cute little mouth, you know, on her pillow. Never to wake up. She's not sleeping. She's drifting off, you know, into death. And then, like I said, you know, rigor mortis sets in. You know, cops show up. You know, whatever. However, whenever. You know, how long has she been dead? You know, she's all stiff and shit. And it's just like this sweet little girl. You know, this poor little lamb. Just couldn't take it. Dumb bitch. And that's the way she was wired. She couldn't get through it. Just as much as the move and do not move. Well, you're standing in his way, bro. You know, your damn ego, man. You're going to take a life. You know, like I said, 2nd-degree murder. I'm kind of thinking 1st degree, my friend. I think deep down you knew. It's the last time I'm going to motherfucking lose this asshole. Oh, man. I was not expecting to have to do that today. Oh, boy, yeah, talk to the camera and the microphone. Holy shit. But that's the sound of no remorse. But, anyway. And that guy, you know, what'd I do wrong? Honking the horn, you know, that, whoo. You know, Katie Boo was wired the same way. She was just a frowny face. She was sad. She had that fucking amazing smile and those eyes. And I guess they were kind of green. I don't know. Fuck, on that one picture I'll never be able to do. But mine are generally blue, but it's like they change colors if my eyes are red. And it's like they're spliced, you know. They're not just green, but they're like whatever. But she did it. Dumb fucking bitch.